All right, well, good evening. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and be turning to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis 15. The year was 1934, and the country was in the midst of what we know of today as the Great Depression. On top of that, in the middle part of the country, the Great Plains, and going up on even up into Canada, you may know they were on top of the Great Depression. We're dealing with what was known as the Dust Bowl. And that was particularly impactful in the state of Oklahoma. Well, that very year, at the start of the year, the First Baptist Church of Ada, Oklahoma, was holding revival services. Now, these were not the new kind today. These were 2 week. I looked up the dates on it. It was a 2-week scheduled revival service at the start of 1934. And there was the man that was leading the singing at that meeting was known as B.B. McKinney. He was a well-known and well-respected song leader and songwriter of that era. And as he was there at those services, leading the worship, sitting under the preaching, the Lord began to stir in him to do something. I don't know if it was one of the sermons that was preached, but the passage Mark 11 and verse 22 was speaking to him. In that passage, you may not know that offhand, but it says to us, "And Jesus answered and said to them, 'Have faith in God.'" And so as McKinney was thinking about that, thinking about what was going on in the country, just the economic uncertainty, everything going on around him in Oklahoma as well, the Lord began to speak to him, lead him about writing a song that would bring comfort to people. All these people that were anxious about the future, didn't know what might come. He just felt led to sit down and pen some lyrics to help them. And so the song that came out of that is, we can call it an old hymn today, because like I said, it was written almost, approaching 100 years ago now, a little over 90 years. The song that came out of that, though, is named after those last 4 words of that verse, "Have faith in God." And you can see that's the title of the message we're going to look at tonight. The second verse in particular, I think, speaks to us in terms of how Abram felt, how you and I may feel sometimes. But the second verse of that old hymn says this: "Have faith in God when your prayers are unanswered. Your earnest plea He will never forget. Wait on the Lord, trust His word, and be patient. Have faith in God, He'll answer yet." Now, like I said, I think that's a pretty good description for Genesis chapter 15, for what we encounter here. We've seen a lot of Abram so far. He's not quite Abraham yet. That'll be 2 more chapters, about 10 more years down the road probably. He'll get his name changed to Abraham. He's still Abram at this point. But Abram is kind of in that place. Abram was an honorable man. He was a righteous man. He trusted God. But there were times where probably even his faith was a little tested. Kind of like you and I maybe sometimes. And so as we look tonight, what we see is God reaffirming for Abram some things that He had already promised him. Abram is looking at his life, and it's not exactly what he wants. And he wonders why God hadn't changed some things that are taking place. And that may be how you and I are sometimes. God, 3 chapters earlier, you may recall in Genesis 12, He first presents to Abram what we know as the Abrahamic covenant. That promise to him that I will make you great, I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. All these different promises He gives to him there. Well, tonight, He kind of continues with that. And again, it's kind of a reaffirmation as well. But He really kind of consecrates that covenant. He kind of really nails it down for Abram and tells him, this is what's going to happen. It's as good as done. Abram, just trust me. Have faith in me that this is going to be done. So as we go through the chapter tonight, won't have every verse on the screen. I'll read them all to you. So if you've got your Bible open, you can follow along with me. But we're going to look at the first 6 chapters to begin, or first 6 verses to begin. The first thing we see is that God reassures Abram that he will have a son. That's kind of the pressing issue that Abram's really frustrated with at this point. So begin with me, chapter 15, verse 1. It says, "After these things." Now, what's taken place? Remember the previous chapter, we have Lot being kidnapped. Abram goes out and rescues him. He then meets Melchizedek. We talked about that last time. So after these things, the writer says, "The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, 'Do not fear, Abram, for I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be great.' But Abram said, 'Lord God, what will you give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?' Abram also said, 'Since you have given me no son, one who has been born in my house is my heir.' Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, 'This man will not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body will be your heir.' And he took him outside and said, "Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." Then he believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So I want to just kind of look at this first section to begin tonight and look at some points of these verses. And right off the bat, just right at the beginning of this chapter, it's something we may overlook sometimes. But don't ignore the statement that's made here. Right at the beginning, the word of the Lord came to Abram. Now you may say, what's the big deal of that? So what? God comes and speaks to him. We say that a lot in the Scripture. Describing it that way, the word of the Lord came to Abram. You know how that description is normally given? Who that refers to? Prophets. You go read through the Old Testament. You go read about these prophets when they begin their ministry, when they have a message to go and take to the people. What does it say? The word of the Lord came to so-and-so. The word of the Lord came to Samuel. It came to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Literally, you don't have to turn there now, but literally the first words of the book of Jonah are the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. I mean, that's how the book begins. And so whenever you see that, it's the word of God coming to speak to an individual, to give them a very specific message. A prophet in the Old Testament was not just somebody who could predict the future. It was somebody that God spoke to directly, had a message that came from God that was for that individual or was for other people. You know, we've already seen that Abram, he's clearly a good businessman. He's a farmer. We learned last time he's apparently a pretty good soldier, pretty good general as well. Now we see he's a prophet also. Abram's not the only individual in the Old Testament that we maybe don't think of as a prophet. Moses was a prophet. David was a prophet. All these individuals you can see in the Old Testament, when God spoke to them, when God led them to write, when God gave them a special message, it's showing us that they were prophets. That they were people that God came to with a specific message, like I said, either for them or for other people, to take to other people. But just right there off the bat, don't ignore that opening statement. This is the word of the Lord coming to Abram. He's an Old Testament prophet like many of these others that we see. And so the word of the Lord comes to him and reassures Abram. He says, "I've got a great reward for you." Now, for us, we read that and we think, well, listen, if God told me that, I'd be fine. Well, you know, maybe we wouldn't. God gives us a lot of promises, and sometimes we aren't as happy as we should be. Abram, he hears this, and for all the credit we want to give him, Abram's a little frustrated. I mean, that's clearly, I think, what verses 2 and 3 say to us. He's promised a reward, but it seems that doesn't mean a whole lot to Abram. You read on and look at what it says, and we know this about Abram. He's got plenty of wealth. Again, we know that he's got all the livestock he could want. He and Lot had so much, remember, they had to split because there just wasn't enough pasture land for both of them together. Remember, we talked last week when he went to rescue Lot. Within his own household, he had 318 soldiers ready to go, trained men ready to go out and to fight. And we speculated he probably had at least 1,000 people, probably well over that, but at least 1,000 that basically their livelihood depended on Abram. I mean, he was probably wealthier than any of us can imagine. He was incredibly successful when it comes to wealth. He's got all the things in the world. God promises him a reward. And he says, well, God, what's it matter? I'm just going to give it to this man Eliezer. I'm just going to give it to a servant in my own household. Eliezer of Damascus, he calls it. Now, this was common in ancient cultures if there was not a biological heir, to pick a servant, maybe a trusted person who's grown up in the household, somebody that they trust. That's who's going to get all of Abram's possessions. If something were to happen to him, that's who would take all those things. And I'm sure Abram thought a lot of Eliezer, but it wasn't his son. And so here's God telling him, I'm going to give you this great reward. And Abram's like, God, okay, but I'm just going to give it to somebody that's not my biological heir. It doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. That was fairly common, like I said, in ancient cultures to have a designated person like that. You and I have that, for any sort of financial things today. If something happened to us, who would we give the money to? If us and our spouse died, who would be the beneficiary? Who would get it? So it may have just been a legal practice that was taking place. But let's be honest, all of us probably have reached that point at some time in our life, haven't we? We look around at things, and Abram's basically gotten to the point, he's basically thinking, what's the point of wealth? What's the point of all these experiences? What's the point of all the resources if you don't have somebody to share it with, if you don't have somebody to give it to, somebody to pass it on to pass it down to? Abram's been successful beyond measure, but he's lacking in that one area. There's somebody he wants to pass this on to. God seems to be promising him even more, and Abram says, well, God, it doesn't really matter. I don't have anybody to give it to. And you go to verse 3, and he, again, I I'm definitely not putting words in Abram's mouth. I don't know his tone when he said this, but we know what he said to God. You see it on the screen. You have given me no son. He's kind of pointing the finger at God, isn't he? He's basically saying to God, God, you're the reason we don't have a son. You have, for whatever reason, decided that we are not going to have a child, and up till now, I've had no son. Abram at this point is probably, we don't know his exact age here. There are times in Genesis we're told his age. We don't know what it is at this moment in Genesis 15. He was 75 when he left Haran. He was 86 when he fathers Ishmael in the next chapter. So he's probably over 80. He's probably 85 maybe at this point or close to that. And so he's gone 85 years. And he's had a successful life. He's accomplished about everything you could, but he's been fruitless in one very specific area. He's not had a son. And like I said, you see what the scripture says. He said to God, you have not given me a son. Again, I don't know his tone. I don't want to read too much into that tonight. But he's kind of pointing the finger at God, isn't he? You're the reason this has not taken place yet. Now, Abram's not perfect. That's human nature. Think about Abram's own wife in the very next chapter. In Genesis chapter 16. I don't know if this conversation is what leads to this. But remember, in the next chapter, she comes to Abram and she says, why don't you have a child with Hagar, my handmaiden? And look at the language. I've got it on the screen for you. Look at what she actually says to Abram. See now, in Genesis 16:2, these are the words of Sarah. See now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. So I don't know if Abram and Sarah, they're a married couple. I don't know if they've talked about this in this way or not. But it sounds like maybe they've both got this attitude. That happens in marriages sometimes where you two share an attitude toward a specific person or a specific situation. And maybe that's how they both feel about God. They're both blaming God for it. But you see the similarity in that. God says to him, you have not given me a son. What does Sarah say? The Lord has prevented me from not bearing children. So they're pointing the finger at God. But again, this is human nature. Go back to the very first sin, the fall in the Garden of Eden. And we all know what Adam says. When God asked him, why did you eat of this fruit? Look at what he says. The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me some of the fruit of the tree and I ate it. Before Adam ever admits he did it, he blames God and he blames his wife before he ever even gets to himself. Again, it's human nature to point the finger at others when we mess up or when life just doesn't go the way we want. Can I be bitter at somebody else about that? And that seems to be what's going on with Abram. Again, I don't want to assume his attitude. I just know what the words say. And I know what he was saying to God. Clearly, there's some frustration. There is some anxiety in his life at this point. But it's human nature. And even Abram, even this great patriarch, he wasn't above this from time to time, looking and saying, God, this is kind of on you. I want this. Why have you not done this in my time? Why have you not done this in the way that I would want you to? So we see these, and then you continue on in verse 4. God assures Abram. He says, Abram, listen. He says, Eliezer's not going to be your heir. He says, one who will come from your own body. You will have a biological heir. Nothing against Eliezer. Eliezer's going to be just fine, I think. But he's not going to get everything from Abram. God promises him, you are going to have a biological heir. You are going to give birth to a son. Now again, Abram's probably 85 at this point. He's 10 years older than Sarah. She's 75 at this point. But here's the promise. You are going to have a biological son. Now maybe the language, I don't know, but maybe the language that God uses here is why Abram was willing to go along with Sarah and Hagar in the next chapter. Because Sarah comes to the conclusion, well, Abram may have a child, but I can't. So Abram, you go into Hagar and you two have a child together. And maybe Abram thought, well, okay, God just promised that the child would come from me. So maybe that's what we need to do. I don't know if that's what Abram's thinking was, but God makes it very clear to him. Eliezer's not going to be your heir. You're not just going to have to give things to your servant as kind of a legal descendant. You will have a child. I promise you of that. And to kind of illustrate this, he tells him to go outside. This very famous scene, what we all know and have heard about. He tells him to go outside and look up at the stars, look up at the sky. And he tells him, look at those, count those stars. He said, that's what your descendants are going to be like. Think about that. You've got an 85-year-old and a 75-year-old. They've never had children. And God promises him, he says, your descendants are going to be like the stars of the sky. That millions upon millions. I don't know if you've ever been somewhere. It's hard living in a town with what they call light pollution. to ever go somewhere and just really see what the sky looks like. I went to Yellowstone National Park a few years ago and out there camping, away from all the lights and everything. I got a pretty good idea, a better appreciation for what the sky looks like. And maybe some of you have had that experience. They say one of the best places in the world to go is the Atacama Desert, located in South America. There's an image there. There are actually tours that will take you there. If you want to go and travel there because of the elevation and just the lack of any sort of moisture. It's a very dry area and just being so separated from any cities or anything. It is one of the best places on earth to go and to try to see the night sky. And I don't know if any picture can do it justice, but you can maybe see in that. As you look at that, you can see all those little dots. And that's probably kind of what Abram was looking at. It wasn't like stepping out in the backyard in KInston somewhere. He was out in the wilderness. There was no artificial light. And God showed him that night sky, and he said, that's what your descendants are going to be like. And again, you think about where Abram is in his life. For God to tell him those words, that probably would have been hard to comprehend. Hard to really embrace this idea, this promise that God has given to him. But that's what God says. Your descendants, they're going to be like the stars of the sky. And you can just imagine all those nights that Abram probably looked up. I don't know if he ever thought to try to count. But seeing all those stars and the God of the universe telling him this is what your children are going to be like. Those who come after you, out of your family, out of your body, that's what it's going to be like. And what does Abram do? It says that he believed in the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That's a very famous and well-known statement. You see it re-emphasized in the New Testament to talk about faith and the importance of faith, that salvation is not by works. It's simply by faith in God and who He is and the work that He's done. And so we see that Abram believes this. Now there's two thoughts I think that come from that. First of all, as we're going to see, I think Abram still had doubts and struggles. Here is God giving him this assurance, but Abram was not perfect. It wasn't like he messed up to this point and then was perfect from there on out. He would still stumble. You and I still stumble. And he would struggle with that still too from time to time. But we should always trust God. Even in those very difficult times, trust God, even when it may look impossible. If He's promised something, trust Him. But again, the second point I want to make is kind of what that verse says. Abram's faith was counted as righteousness. It wasn't anything that Abram had done. That literally was nothing he could do about this. I promise you, he and Sarah had wanted, had hoped, had prayed for a child. There was nothing more they could do to help in this process. It wasn't anything he had done, but it was his belief that God could do everything and had done everything. That is what would lead him across the finish line. That was what that was entailing. That's what that means. It's not about our works. It's simply about trusting in who God is and the finished work of Jesus Christ. What it is that He has done, what He's already accomplished. We bring nothing to it other than just our sin and our faith that God can forgive us and the work of Jesus Christ will cover those sins. And that's what Abram bought. The New Testament, like I said, tells us about this. In Galatians 3, Paul writes about this. He illustrates this fact for New Testament believers about the inefficiency of the law, that it can't do all these things. But he talks about how if our faith is placed in Jesus Christ, he says we're like Abram. Look at Galatians chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. It's on the screen for you. So then does He who provides you with the Spirit and works miracles among you do it by the works of the law or by hearing with faith? Just as Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness, therefore recognize that those who are of faith who are the sons of Abraham. You and I are the sons, the spiritual descendants of Abraham. Why? Because we trust in the finished work of God. It's not anything we have done. We have simply placed our trust and our faith in it. I don't know if there's an ideal illustration for that. One I came across, the well-known pastor and writer John Piper, he tried to explain it this way, and I still don't know if it's perfect. But he said, imagine this. He said, imagine if I tell my son, son, there's a ball game on tonight you want to watch. Every young man grows up wanting to watch ball games. He says, you want to watch this ball game tonight, but your room is filthy. So before you go to school today, you need to clean your room and get that done. If you don't clean your room, you don't get to watch the ball game. And he said, my son, let's say he delays, he procrastinates. He ends up going to school, has not touched that room. The day gets away from him, all the extracurriculars, all the activities he has going on after school. He gets home, the game's about to start, and he realizes he never got around to cleaning his room. And he comes to me and he says, Dad, I'm sorry. I understand. I accept my punishment. I'm not apologizing so that you'll let me go watch the game. I am genuinely sorry. You gave me this command and I failed. Dad, I am sorry. And Piper said, it'd be like me saying to my son, listen, son, while you were gone today, I went in the room and I saw that you didn't clean it. And I wanted that room clean, so I cleaned it. And he said, son, the fact you've come to me and you've apologized, I know you're genuine about it, but the fact you've apologized, and because the room is clean now, he says, I'm going to credit your apology as being the same as if you had done it. Because it's been done, because I did the work, because I did it, and it's your room, I'm going to credit that to you because you've apologized for it. So son, if you want to go watch the game, you go watch the game. Now, again, I don't know if there's any real perfect analogies for salvation, but that's kind of the idea. There's nothing we could have done. We come acknowledging we failed eternally. In every way, infinitely imaginable, we have failed. But God has done every bit of it. But because we come sorry and in faith that He has accomplished these things, He credits it to us. The work that's been done, we are now made righteous. We are now credited in that way. That's what's taking place with Abram. As he trusted in God's promises, it's credited to him as righteousness. There's nothing more Abram could have done. He was simply trusting in God and what it was that he could do. So first of all, we see that God reassures Abram of this promise, that he will have a son. And then as you move on, we see next, God reveals to Abram that there will also be a nation that will come from him. He reaffirms this. He's already talked about it with the picture of the stars and everything from there. But go now with me to verse 7 and go down through verse 11 and look at what it says. Again, we end in verse 6. Abram believes him. It's credited unto him as righteousness. And then we pick up in verse 7. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to possess it. But he said, Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? So he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him and cut them in two and laid each half opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds. And the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. Now you start to get into kind of digging into some of these chapters sometimes. You wonder, well, where's this going? Well, God is working something out. He's doing something in this. But look with me at what the conversation is here, what's taking place. The Lord promises Abram that the land he's living in, he says, this is going to be yours. Now, there's going to be a delay. He's going to go through and explain that to him. It's not going to be right away. We know the story. We know the Exodus journey and all those different things. But he says, this land that you're in, this is the land I'm going to give your family. Again, what was the previous promise? Look at the stars. That's what your descendants are going to be like. And what does he say to him here? This is the land you're going to have. This is where you'll live. This is where those descendants will grow and where they'll be. And Abram, again, I don't know that this is doubt at this point. I think he's received this promise from God. He simply wants confirmation of it. And so he asks him, he says, how will I know this? What evidence is there? How can I know that this is what's going to take place? And so we see something kind of unique in what God says to him. But he explains to him. He says, make a sacrifice. Very specific in what he says. Bring me a heifer. Bring me a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, a pigeon. The 3 larger animals are all cut in half, but placed on either side. The 2 smaller birds, they're not cut in half. But the larger ones, we're told in the description that are given here, they're cut in half. The sacrifice is made and it's presented. And then that kind of unique, that kind of peculiar little statement at the end, the birds of prey came down. And Abram had to kind of shoo them away or make them leave. What is that all about? I think that's probably a picture symbolically of the fact that it's not going to be easy. The nation of Israel, they'd have to struggle to get the land. It'd be time before they got there. If they rebelled, they would have to struggle. We know even up to today, it's a struggle to maintain that land. But that's, I think, probably what's taking place. The promise has been made. And we see that even in the midst of that, these vultures, these other animals, they're going to come in, they're going to try to swoop and take what God has promised. And this agreement that's taking place here between Abram and God. And so I think it's a symbolic gesture of what's taking place. But Abram has to go out and shoo them away, keep these animals away from this covenant that God is making with him and this sacrifice that's taking place. And so God promises him here in this middle part of the chapter that there's going to be a great nation. And this is where they'll be. This very land is where they're going to be at. Now, could God do that? It's interesting. Here's God giving these very specific details. Is God capable of that? Absolutely. The book of Job, he says to us here about God and his power. Speaking of God, he makes the nations great, then destroys them. He enlarges the nations, then leads them away. We understand anything that any nation has simply been what God has given to them. I don't want to go off on any sort of tangent tonight in terms of what we may think of our country, but we know this is our 250th anniversary. The birthday of our country. I can't imagine that we would have what we have if not for the blessings of God. God is the one who's given every bit of that to us. I think we're a nation that has adhered to those Christian values. Whatever people may think of our founding or what our beliefs are, I think that at their core is biblical teaching and what God wants us to know about human nature and about human value and things like that. When we start to deviate from that, and then we probably are to a great extent these days, but if we get too far away from that, the same God who built us up, He can tear us down, can't He? That's what history says. All these great nations, even if they didn't follow God, He, for whatever reason, built them up for a time, and then He tore them down when it was time. And He even tells His own people sometimes, I use this nation to punish you, because you rebelled, so I let this other nation come in and take you. But again, as the book of Job says, He's the one who makes nations great. He's the one who destroys them. He enlarges them. He's the one who leads them away. Exile, that's what's going to happen to Israel and to Judah years later, isn't it? They're taken into exile by other empires. And so this same God who would do these things, He's saying to Abram here, He says, I'm going to make a great nation in terms of a population. And here's where you're going to be. Here's the land that you are going to have. It's going to be right here in this area. So He promises him, and he makes this revelation to him. This is the land where you get to be. So he assures him, first of all, that he's going to have a son, that he will have a biological son. He says, this is where your descendants are going to live. And then as we come to the last part of the chapter, we see this. He reaffirms this promise to Abram with a covenant. Now, we're kind of in the middle of it at this point. He's already told Abram to make this sacrifice and to cut these animals, to leave them out. And so it goes on and tells us this. Go with me, first of all, to verse 12 and go down through verse 16. And it says this. Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. Then God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward I will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation they will return here, for the wrongdoing of the Amorite is not yet complete. There's one more section we'll look at in this final point. I want to break it down into two parts. So we're told that Abram falls into this deep sleep. The Lord begins to reveal some things to him about the future. And again, don't overlook the fact these are very specific details. God isn't just making broad generalizations. He's telling him very specific things that we know do come to pass. We read the rest of Genesis. We read the book of Exodus. We've all seen the movie, The Ten Commandments. We know all these things, and this is what God is saying some 600 years before it takes place. He's giving out the very specific details of this. He tells them that they would be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years. Obviously, the bondage they would go through in the land of Egypt. But he says eventually I'll judge that nation. We know what that was. Those were the plagues, weren't they? The plagues that he would send. Ultimately, the Red Sea and destroying Pharaoh's army in that. But he says, I'll judge this nation. And not just that, you're going to come out with many possessions. You go, and it's not on the screen, going to read it, but in Exodus 12, after the Passover, Pharaoh tells Moses and the people, get out. Go. Just get out. That's why they had to pack so quickly to get out of there, because Pharaoh was ready for them to go. But in chapter 12, we're told the Egyptians were almost giving them things, throwing these things at them. I don't know if they felt bad for the years of oppression or what, but it actually says to us there of the Israelites, they plundered the Egyptians. That they walked out of there with all of this wealth, all this fine jewelry and all these other things that they took from them. God promised that centuries earlier. He said this is going to happen. I'm going to punish this nation. You're going to come out with their possessions when it's all said and done. And then he says to him, and he doesn't really, say this specifically, but I get the impression what he's saying to Abram is, now Abram, when you finally get back to the land, you're not going to be with them. It's going to be a good ways from now, a good time from now. He said, but don't worry, you're still going to have a long life. When it was all said and done, we're told that Abram would live to be 175 years old. Now, obviously, the lifespans after the flood, they were getting shorter and shorter. Isaac, I believe, Abram's son, would live to be 180. And I don't know if anyone after that in the Bible is listed as living that long. But Abram would live to be 175. That's a good long life. Something interesting about that, think about this. We've talked about how Abram, he's probably 85 at this point. He's frustrated that he's been lacking in this one area. He has never had a son, and that really seems to be gnawing at him, seems to be weighing on him. Abram's life is still not half over yet. He still has 90 years left. He's not even at the halfway point. And so as long as his life has been, God is still not even halfway through with what his plans are for Abram. And you and I think about that. Now, I'm not saying any of us are going to live to be 175. But I do want you to think about that. If Abram was 85, at most, may not even been quite that old, and he's not halfway through his life, God's not even really halfway done with him yet in terms of what he wants him to do. When you and I get impatient, when you and I think, God, why isn't this going on my schedule? Why isn't this happening as quickly as I want? We have no idea where we are in life. We have no idea where we are kind of on that chart, how much more God has in store for us. Abram's not even halfway through his life. And God's going to do a whole lot more in Abram's life as he keeps going on. And so I think there's a comfort level in that as he tells Abram, you've still got a lot of life left. There's a lot of experiences. There's a lot you're still going to get to see and do in your life. He's not even halfway there yet. So wherever you are, wherever we may feel discouraged sometimes, remember, we may not even be halfway through it yet in terms of what God is doing in that situation or that particular experience. And so he's describing these very specific details about the coming nation, the things that they will do, and then he turns it back to coming back to the land of Canaan. So go with me now to verse 16. We'll close out the chapter and then make some comments from there. Verse 17. Stick with 16 for a minute before we keep going. But he talks about this, the fourth generation will return. And he says to him something kind of peculiar at the end. He says, after the wrongdoing of the Amorite, which is not yet complete. Now, if you go through and look at the lineage from Levi, who was the son of Jacob, he was one of the 12 sons, one of the 12 tribes. You go through and look at Levi down to Moses, one of his descendants. What is it? It's Levi, then we're told it's Kohath, then we're told it's Amram, and then it's Moses. So exactly 4 generations from the time they went in till Moses let them out. Those are the exact words that God says. The 4th generation, they'll come out. And that's exactly what happened. After they went into the land of Goshen, 4 generations would pass, and it would be Moses that would lead the people out after these 400 to 430 years of bondage. And he says there that after this time, the Amorites, that God is still dealing with them. Now, the Amorites, that was a people group, but it may have also been just a general name for the Canaanites. These were the people that lived in Canaan during this time. And they were very wicked. They were rebellious. They had sexual perversion, child sacrifice, all these terrible things that they were doing. And so God is essentially saying, he's saying they still have time too, though. He says, in due time, I'm going to come back. If they've not repented, I'm going to punish them. I'm going to give you this land from them. But he's giving them time. He's giving them a lot of time, 400 years. He's given the people of Canaan before the Israelites are going to come back and take this land. God does this. We know in the story of Jonah. He sends Jonah with this message to Nineveh. You have 40 days to repent, and then I'm going to destroy the city. And the people listened, that they repented for this time. So we see in this God's character, God is patient. And each and every one of us, myself, you included, we probably all can point to times God was way more patient with us than we deserved. It may even been in terms of salvation. There may be one of you here tonight that you look back at your salvation, you look back at your testimony, and you can probably point to instances God maybe could have taken you out. He could have taken you out of this world and sent you out into eternity without Him. But He was patient, He was kind, He was loving, and eventually we came to that point where we accepted that salvation. We came and we believed. And so God is giving the people of Canaan. So think about that. When the Israelites come back, and that's one of the criticisms people have of the Old Testament, that people who doubt the Bible, they'll look at the Old Testament, they'll look at the warfare, they'll look at the things that take place, and they'll say, why would God do that? Why would He have them go in and sack these nations and these cities and destroy them like that? He gave them 400 years at least to turn from their wickedness. I mean, these were wicked people. Like I said, Deuteronomy tells us these people were making child sacrifices to their gods. Okay, these were not nice, decent people that were just wanting to wanted to have a green yard and have a nice, quiet evening. These were wicked, idolatrous people. And God gave them every effort to turn before the nation of Israel would come back and would do these things. But he promises these things to Abram. Eventually, your people will come back and they will have this land after the Amorites have had their time and I've given them their opportunity. So go with me now to the concluding part of this chapter, picking up in verse 17. Now it came about when the sun had set And it was very dark, and behold, a smoking oven and a flaming torch appeared, which passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. The land of the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephaim, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. He says, I'm specifically giving him these assurances of this. So as the prophecy kind of comes to a conclusion, the passage comes to this part with God coming back to these sacrifice pieces. This image that appears, that Abram sees in here, we're told it's smoke and it's fire. The smoking oven, you think about through the Old Testament, the times we see smoke and what it represents. Often it speaks to the presence of God, His very presence in a situation. Remember when the children of Israel leave, they've got the cloud that leads them during the day. When they're at Mount Sinai and they look up on the mountain, what do they see? They see clouds, they see smoke. They see that coming from up there. When God would fill the temple, what was it? His Shekinah glory. The smoke that would show up, this cloud that would show people God's presence in that place. The fire as well in the Old Testament. You see this as a representation of God, of who He was, of His character. That cloud by day, what was it at night? It was a pillar of fire to lead the people. How did God speak to Moses to tell him to go and deliver the children of Israel? A burning bush. A bush that was on fire, but the bush was not consumed. Think about those times, those sacrifices that God approved of, and fire would come down from heaven and accept. So here's Abram seeing this smoke, seeing this fire. It's the very presence of God. The very character of God is before him, walking through those pieces. These animals that have been cut in half, this sacrifice, this covenant that's been made. God is showing that He's coming through this in what He's doing. Now, one of the neat things about this is He's going through and talking about this. In Near Eastern customs, this was customary. This was normal. People making a covenant, making a bond, they would walk through it together. And essentially what they were doing was they made this promise as they walked through those pieces of that dead animal. What they were saying was, if I break this covenant, if I break this promise, may what happened to these animals happen to me. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? Imagine if that was the word you gave somebody. If I go back on this, let my life be taken. And that was the custom that would take place then. Well, notice what we're told in this passage. Abram doesn't walk through it. It's the presence of God, isn't it? It's the smoke, it's the fire. What does this reaffirm for us? This covenant is entirely God's doing. Abram has no part in this in terms of what he contributes. This is God doing all this. This is God taking the initiative. He's saying to Abram, you will have a son. You will have a great nation. You will get this land. I'm making all these promises to you. I'm the one who's doing all of this. Abram, you simply receive it. Abram doesn't have to get up and walk through these animals. This is all a one-sided, so to speak, kind of covenant. God is saying, I'm going to take care of all this. I'm the one wanting to do this, and I'm the one who's going to make sure all these things take place. And so as you keep reading through the rest of the Old Testament, on up into the New Testament, and you see what God does with the nation of Israel, you see all these things that come out, the fruition of this covenant that God made. He knows all the things He's going to do in the future. And so He makes this promise to Abram, and it's God who's doing this. It's His initiative to go and to do this and to make this promise with Abram. And He promises him the land of Canaan. As we draw to the end of these last few verses, He tells him about this land. He specifies the borders, you see, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river of the Euphrates. He's telling him the literal markers, the boundaries. This will be your land. And we know in the days of David and on in the days of Solomon, that was about the extent of the nation of Israel, the kingdom that they had. It got to be to about that point. And then one final detail that he gives to him here, and again, it goes back to the patience of God, but it also tells us the power of God. Because he tells him at the end, he reminds us in those last couple of verses, oh yeah, there's at least 10 nations that already live in that land. They're not just going to let you come in all these years later and just let you take over. But we know the story. We know that as they went in, the nation of Israel, if they were obedient, if they trusted God, it was pretty easy to go through and defeat these armies, wasn't it? I mean, if they trusted God, the walls of Jericho would fall down. If they didn't go to God before battling Ai, even a tiny city like that would defeat them. But as long as they trusted God and were obedient, God they'd have no issues going in and defeating all these people. But it sets up for us the fact that this land, it's going to be God's work to do. It's not like it's empty and they just go in and settle. We're told here and now, oh yeah, there's a bunch of people that already live there. And they're not just going to like for you to come in and take their land. But who's doing this? God. It's His initiative. It's His power. Every aspect of it. It is God's leading and God's doing. So when they come back all these centuries later to claim this land, it'll be God that does it. He'll be the one who comes in and gives this to them. So God gives this promise, makes this covenant to Abram. Like I said earlier, the dead animals walking through kind of pictures this idea, if I fail, may I die. Well, is God going to fail? Absolutely not. Isaiah chapter 55 tells us this, so will my word be which goes out of my mouth. It will not return unto me empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the purpose for which I sent it out. God promised Abram it would take place, and we know the rest of the story. We know it does. And it happens exactly as God says it would, but He makes this promise. So what can we draw tonight as we come to the end? What's some application we can take from Genesis chapter 15? First of all, as Abram teaches each one of us, trust God in the middle of the problem. He's a long way from being done. We simply don't know where we are in the story. It may look kind of dark. We may be kind of discouraged. Trust God. It's a long way from being done. The second one is one of those deep thoughts that came from childhood in children's church and Sunday school. There was a song we learned, Father Abraham, and a line in it said this, I am one of them and so are you. That's a lesson of application I think we can take tonight as well. We can benefit from this. You know, that's one thing I've always appreciated. These old kids' songs we learn, they're pretty deep theologically when you think about it. I mean, Father Abraham's talking about us as the spiritual descendants of Abraham. That's pretty deep. You know, he's got the whole world in his hand. That's pretty deep theologically when you really think about what's saying there. And so that's what the lesson is. I am one of them and so are you. We are the spiritual descendants. We are the sons and the daughters of Abraham. We also learn this, God has control over every detail and is sovereign over all of human history. He tells Abram the very specifics, the dates, the years. He tells him the boundaries, all these specific details. Even some of those minuscule ones. You're going to walk out with all the possessions of Egypt. You're going to be in bondage for 400 years, for 4 generations. God knows each and every detail. He knows all those things. We also see, as we studied with the Amorites, God is patient with sinners, but that patience does run out. There does come a point where God will put up with no more. We saw it in the story of the flood. We see it with the land of Canaan. You see it on and on throughout the Old Testament with Israel and Judah, with the kingdoms, on into the New Testament with people who would rebel. God is patient with sinners, but that patience does eventually run out. And then the last point of application, it goes back to the title tonight. Christians, what can we take from this? Simply have faith in God. Have faith in God wherever we are in the story, whatever our frustration, whatever we feel like we don't have. If we are serving God, if we are His children, we are right in the middle of what He's doing in our lives. I read the second verse of that old hymn to start. I want to conclude with the chorus. It says this to us. It says this, have faith in God, He's on the throne. Have faith in God, He watches o'er His own. He cannot fail, He must prevail. Have faith in God, have faith in God. To those who've joined us online tonight, we appreciate you being here. We hope you'll have a good week. We'd love to have you join us in person here at Bethel anytime, but thank you for being with us tonight.